The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Now, there has been a recent public outcry regarding a proposed wind power project in Mannar. Most of the public outcry has been directed towards the environmental harms and damages that could occur as a result of this proposed project. But tonight's discussion will also focus on whether this project has followed due process in its proposal stage. Is it a rip-off? And also the transparency concerns. To have the conversation, I'm pleased to welcome to the studio award-winning biodiversity scientist Rohan Pethiyagoda. Mr. Pethiyagoda, good to have you back on the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, speaking about this proposed wind power project in Mannar, most of the people have focused on the environmental damage that could occur. But to begin the conversation, I'd like to ask you, has it followed due process? Usually when we take any project of this magnitude especially, there are calls for proposals, there's a procurement process that's outlined in the law, bidding takes place, which is how it becomes a transparent process. Has this been done?
No. So the process has been very opaque. Nobody really knows how the Adani company was engaged to do this project. No one really knows on what basis they produced their initial proposal, on which the Central Environment Authority gave them permission to do an environmental impact assessment. And no one knows how the pricing that was offered by them has been negotiated. It's entirely opaque. And what is most astonishing is that this project has been known for quite some time. That it's been implemented. But of course the details haven't been known to us, the public. But up to this date, only a very small handful of politicians, MPs in Parliament, have raised concerns about this. And if you give me the opportunity, I'll explain to you just why this project is smelling so much of fish.
Okay, please.
So first off, wind is a natural resource, just like hydropower is. Sri Lanka gets 30 to 40% of its electricity now from hydropower. Wind is poised to give us about another 25% in the very short term, and wind is cheap now.
Right.
It costs about 2 US cents, which is basically about 6 or 7 rupees a kilowatt hour, a unit of electricity, way cheaper than what we are paying in domestic pricing. So we really have to exploit this resource because the price of wind energy worldwide has been falling very sharply over the last 10 years. The technology is increasing, and because of the effects of scale, because wind energy is being used so much now, that the manufacturing of the turbines and towers and so on that are involved in wind energy are becoming much cheaper. In the US, a kilowatt hour, a unit of electricity is now less than 2 cents. So it surprised me when I saw a figure being mentioned of 9.6 cents that we were going to pay Adani for this. The minister in Parliament last week, or the week before, mentioned a figure that he had negotiated them down to 8.7 US cents. But that is still 4 times the world price. And what's astonishing also is in the environmental impact assessment, which is produced by Adani, they give the prices 4.6 cents. The minister is talking about twice that much. So there's something very strange going on here. I looked at the prices that Adani is selling wind power in India.
Okay.
And there it's typically between 3.2 and 3.8 cents. In Sri Lanka, they're asking for 3 times as much. And it looks like the government wants to give it to them. This is very strange. It reminds me very much of the projects that we have so much derision for now, like the Hambantota port, the Matale port, Nelunkolona and so on, which brought this country to its economic knees. And yet the political outcry on this disaster in the making, remember it's an outflow from Sri Lanka of $2.3 billion, bigger than all those projects put together, the ones I just mentioned to you.
Right.
It is massive, and there seems to be no political concern whatsoever about this process going on.
So are you saying that in a backdrop where Sri Lanka is insolvent, we are proposing to purchase our own renewable energy from a foreign company and send the money back overseas.
Isn't that absolutely crazy? But that's exactly what they're trying to do. I mean, can you wrap your head around this stupidity? Is it, it's really treason as I see it, because in a situation where the country doesn't have $2 to start repaying its debt with, where we can't import many things to keep the tourist industry going, for example, we are looking at exporting $2.3 billion in the lifetime of this project to buy our own wind with. It makes absolutely no sense. So, like you said at the beginning, if we had a transparent call for proposals, gave opportunities for local companies to participate, to bid for this, and then had competitive bidding so that you get the best possible price, you would be much better off. We would have cheaper energy, we'd have more reliable energy, and we'd keep this money, this wealth, as part of our national asset base. Right now, we're just giving it away to this strange man who's come along and demanded it because he seems to be very influential. But we can't let that happen. That is fundamentally wrong. It is unjust. And it is unfair to the people, the poor people who have to pay for electricity in this country, who are going through periods without getting medicines because there's no foreign exchange. And we are giving this money to this guy from India. This is crazy.
Let's also discuss the environmental considerations. It is before the public domain that due process was not followed, regulatory frameworks were not followed with respect to the environmental impact assessments, for example. If you could take us through that process.
So the core of the environmental impact assessment process, which is enshrined in Section 33 of the National Environment Act, that lays out how the EIA, the environmental assessment, has to be performed. And that enshrines a very important principle. That is that whenever you want to do a project that disturbs the environment, you must assess all possible other alternative sites at which you can perform that project and see whether the environmental harm you do there is going to be less. But here we have a situation in which the EIA assesses 5 possible sites like Kalpitiya and southeast Sri Lanka and Jaffna and so on. And it finds that Mannar is in fact 4th on the list.
Okay.
There are 3 better sites that they themselves identify,
right,
but they give no reasons whatever that as to why the project should be sited in Mannar, which is a very fragile area. If you think about Mannar, it is this little peninsula, now an island, that sticks up towards India. It was the last land connection, the isthmus that connected Sri Lanka to India until about 10,000 years ago. Okay. So migratory species, because of millions of years of evolutionary habit, have used this as a corridor, birds for example. And they fly down the peninsula, they come and rest there for the first time when they enter the island. Hundreds of thousands of birds, more than 100 species. This is one of the richest bird habitats in the world, which is why we've got 5 protected areas in and around Mannar. And then, of course, some of them disperse elsewhere in the country, some of them remain there during the breeding season, during the winter, and then as the spring comes, they move back north. Now, people who've been studying this, like Professor Debacle and Professor Sampath Seneviratne at the University of Colombo, have found that these birds migrate as far north as the Arctic Circle, over the Himalayas. This is a wonderful part of a natural history story that we are the heirs of. And we intend to disrupt this without really thinking about it very carefully. So the plan of this project is to build 52 wind turbines. I just want to tell you what a wind turbine is.
Sure.
A wind turbine is a big fan that's mounted, 3 big blades mounted on a tower. Each of the towers is about as tall as the World Trade Center building in Fort.
Right.
These are massive towers built out of steel. On top of that is mounted the turbine with the 3 blades. The length of each blade is about 240 feet, about 70 meters. Right? So these massive blades are mounted on this. And together with the turbine, the entire structure is about as tall as the Altair Towers in Colombo 2, near Gangarame. That's the 3rd tallest building in Sri Lanka. So these towers are massive. We're going to build 52 of them to deliver electricity according to the project for the next 25 years. And these are being built all over Mannar. It's a big matrix of wind turbines. And the consequences for bird life are obvious. There's going to be some mortality, but maybe that's an acceptable level of mortality of birds. We have to accept that no project on this planet is without harm.
Right.
Every project involves some degree of loss of biodiversity, changes of ecosystems, and so on. We've got to suck that up because we ourselves do that every day. By just being alive, we disturb the planet. So we have to accept that in order to flourish, human beings need to disturb the environment as little as possible. So here in Mannar, I accept that perhaps this is the best site. But as I said earlier, the EIA, the Environment Impact Assessment itself, shows that it is not the best site, that there are 4 better sites in the country. And they pay no attention at all to why it shouldn't be sited there. So I'm not saying, for example, don't have this in Mannar. I'm just saying follow the right process and tell us why you should have it in Mannar, which is what they haven't done. Similarly, with the costing, why can't we have local companies participating? Some politician in Parliament has to get up and tell us why we can't. What's wrong with Sri Lankan people? We say in Sinhala, api kaluda. Because why should we get foreigners to come and do this, which we can easily do? It's just a question of buying turbines, which are freely available in the world market, and just sticking them in the ground. This is not high tech by any means. Okay. It's well within the capacity of Sri Lankan engineers to do. Right? So in that situation, it astonishes me that we have this massive construction coming up on this little island. And then just think about it 25 years down the road. You've gone and planted these massive structures. There is nothing in the environmental impact assessment that tells you when that 25 years is up. 25 years is not a long time. What happens to these towers? Are they going to take it back to India? Because that's the end of their life.
Okay.
You've poured a few 100,000 of tons of steel and concrete onto Mannar, and are they going to just leave it there and go? The environmental impact is completely silent about the decommissioning of this massive structural infrastructure. They've said nothing about what's going to happen then. So is it going to be our job to take this stuff down? What are you going to do with 150,000 tons of concrete and steel? The mass of waste disposal is about the same as the whole of the Colombo Municipal Council for 6 months in the tiny island of Mannar. Are we going to put this on trucks and bring it into the south and dispose of it? Are we going to send it back to India? Are we going to put it in the sea? So this is really poorly thought of. It's a project that is designed to exploit the vulnerable people of Sri Lanka. I don't normally talk like this. I'm not a person who's an environmental lobbyist. I never have been. But I am moved to tears by this because I think it is so fundamentally unjust. It is just like all the projects that brought Sri Lanka to its knees in 2022 and made us insolvent and bankrupt, a laughingstock of the world. And this is just another one to just drain the last little blood that might be flowing in the Sri Lankan vein.
We are in conversation with biodiversity scientist Rohan Pethiyagoda. We're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
The Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka proudly presents SOSL Concert, a musical masterpiece conducted by Kiko Kobayashi with the world premiere of Lalnath De Silva's first cello concert with soloist Dushanti Pereira, One Supe's Light Calvary Overture and Brahms' First Symphony. 23rd of March, 7 p.m. onwards at the Lionel Wendt Theatre. Tickets available now. Electronic media sponsors: Yes 101, Legends 966, Newsfirst and TV1.
The most awaited Alun Ardu celebrations. Wellawire, be ready.
The Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka proudly presents SOSL Concert, a musical masterpiece conducted by Kiko Kobayashi with the world premiere of Lalnath De Silva's first cello concert with soloist Dushanti Pereira, One Supé's Light Cavalry Overture and Brahms' First Symphony. 23rd of March 7 p.m. onwards at the Lionel Wendt Theatre. Tickets available now. Electronic media sponsors Yes 101, Legends 966, Newsfirst and TV1.
ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ විදිහට අපි ගොඩද
මේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති රාමුවත් මේකත් හිස් වූ රාමුවක්
නායකෙක්ට පුළුවන් අවශ්‍යයි නම් සංවේදීත් වෙලා ඒ වෙලාවෙම තාර්කිකත් වෙන්න
ජානමය හේතුත් බලපාන්න පුළුවන් ද සමහර වෙලාවට මානසික තත්ත්ව වෙනස් වෙන්න
මානසික රෝගයක් 80%ක් ජානගතයි 120ක් එන්වයරන්මන්ට් එකේ ඉන්නේ
නින්දේදිත් සිදුවෙන ශ්වසන අපහසුතාවන් පිළිබඳ අපිට වාර්තා වෙනවා මේක ගොරවනකොට වැඩි වෙනවද
නින්දේදී සිදුවන ශ්වසන විහෙරතාවය නැත්නම් මේක හඳුන්වනවා මේ ඔබස්ට්‍රක්ටිව් ස්ලීප් ඇප්නියා කියන තත්ත්වය
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට
TV1 TV for life.
Sri Lanka anticipates even hotter temperatures in April with impact on monsoon rains. Anura expresses dismay over the Speaker's conduct in approving IGP appointment. Anura Duminder and Vasanta Yapa step down from COPE. Basil meets with SLPP parliamentary group. Dayasri forms new alliance with 18 political factions. Tear gas and water cannons on Jana Aragala protest in Colombo. Committee on Public Finance tells CBSL to hold salary increases.
TV1 TV for life.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back. We're discussing the varying impacts of the proposed wind power project in Mannar, and we're in conversation with biodiversity scientist Rohan Pethiyagoda. Mr. Pethiyagoda, let's talk about the misinformation, disinformation surrounding this story. Has it really been mainstreamed? Are the policymakers talking enough about it? We have a massive opposition full of vociferous men mainly who are largely silent. I mean, the pricing data itself that you just raised is absolutely utterly shocking. You don't need too much of a brain to comprehend the dissonance there.
According to the pricing that's been mentioned now, that the minister mentioned in Parliament, of almost 9 cents US cents per kilowatt hour, the Adanis will make about $1 billion, a billion with a B, dollars, more than market price. That is excess profits. What influence that can buy is obviously spectacular. Because why would you pay that much more money to someone if it was a clean competitive deal? I have dark suspicions about this, and I'm really surprised that the 225 members of parliament really haven't paid any attention to this. And as Sonali says, especially the opposition, I would like to see you getting off your seats and looking into this, because it means that the people of Sri Lanka, the poorest people of Sri Lanka, for whom electricity is unaffordable, are going to be paying 2 or 3 times as much for their energy as they should be paying because of your negligence. You have a duty, an obligation to the people who elected you, who put you there, to do justice in this case, and I hope you will live up to that expectation. I'm sorry, I just wanted to make that point because the political interest in this has been negligible, except for 1 or 2 members of parliament who raised this matter. And I really want to see more traction on that, because this is a fundamental issue of transparency, where we are openly, in front of everybody, breaking the principles of good governance. And no one seems to care. in the political world. And this is not good enough. This is what the Aragale was about. This is what in 2022 people went out on the streets and chased away a man who couldn't govern this country properly. And we don't want that to happen again. That is one of the worst things that could happen, because it can go so terribly wrong, as it did with the Arab Spring in North Africa. So I hope that this injustice won't lead one day to anarchy, not because of this project, but because people just can't afford to live. They can't afford to buy their meals and find shelter for themselves. So we have to be responsible. People have got complacent now because the last 2 years have been pretty steady, because we're not paying our debts. But we shouldn't think that we can now start squandering the few dollars that we have. The central bank has barely $3 billion to play with. And when you think that we're paying Mr. Adani $2.3 billion, you can just see what a big amount of Sri Lanka's economy this represents. It is fundamentally unsound. And it commits us to 25 years of commitment that we can't escape from. It's not us who's going to be paying it, it's our children. So just as the bankruptcy that we are now in the middle of was caused by our parents' and our grandparents' profligacy, which is what it was, because we got everything free with borrowed money, and then eventually when the time came to pay, we had nothing to pay back with. We are putting our children and our grandchildren in much greater jeopardy than even we find ourselves. So we really have to be responsible adults. People talk about, oh, Sri Lanka must be more like Singapore. In Singapore, if this deal went, heads would have rolled. People would have gone to prison for this kind of conduct.
If we were to play devil's advocate with this matter, now reducing carbon emissions, climate action, renewable energy, all of this, these are important concepts, things we need to strive towards achieving. So then, what's the complaint?
My complaint is cost. So, of course, we have a duty, an obligation to be good global citizens by reducing emissions as much as we can. But Sri Lanka is already a pretty good performer on this score. About half our total energy needs is unknowingly, unwittingly green, because the poorer households in this country burn firewood that they grow in their woodlots around them. And that doesn't involve imported gas or fuel or electricity, because they can't afford that. So they're green in the sense that they have sustainable energy. 50% or most of Sri Lanka's total energy comes from that source. The tea industry, for example, burns huge amounts of wood, which is harvested, again, more or less sustainably. So we've got good performance. We've got this massive hydroelectric contribution to energy. And of course, wind and solar are the next ways to go. But the thing is, the price of wind and solar have collapsed internationally. And we need to pass on that benefit also to our consumers.
Sure.
So it is irresponsible and corrupt, fundamentally corrupt, to play out innocent consumers just because officials or politicians or somebody wants to make money out of this. It's so easy to do that, but it is so profoundly and fundamentally wrong that we need to stand up and contest them.
Who are the key stakeholders engaged in this enterprise?
You mean from the side of the government?
Yes.
Now that I've invoked the corruption thing, I don't want to say, because I don't want the CID coming and asking me what evidence do you have. All I can tell you is the price speaks for itself. The world market price published by the United States Department of Energy shows a price in the US that exists at about 1.8 cents. In India, Adani itself has been producing similar wind power, 3.2 to 3.8 cents. In Sri Lanka, we have companies at the moment supplying electricity to the grid, wind power in Jaffna, for example, at about 4.5 cents per unit. And now you're planning on paying twice that much to this guy? There's a catch, right?
How does this work across the world? Let's look at a few best practices.
So I think I raised the matter of the end of life of this project.
Sure.
Now what happens in other countries is that through the life of the project proponent, the person who's doing the project, has to contribute to a escrow account. An escrow account is an account held in trust towards that end of life decommissioning cost. So that throughout the life of the project, they contribute to it, and then when the project is over, there is the money with which to decommission, because it will be a hugely expensive thing. Just imagine the cost of disposing of 150,000 tons of stuff. This is huge. And then the money is available. But we haven't thought that far. or we chose to omit it because it's a cost that has to be met by Mr. Adani. And so people have chose to brush it aside and not take it into consideration, either by oversight or by design. But either way, it is wrong because it's a cost that our children will have to pay at some point.
Apart from the environmental impacts that you mentioned, can you also take us through some of the other environmental issues that this project could cause?
So I think the thing that most people are concerned about is the impact on the local community.
Right.
Now, this is a massive project. We're talking about billions of dollars.
Okay.
But there's nothing in it for the local people in Mannar. There's almost no employment, and it's trivially small, a few hundred jobs. This is not important. And they're paying the price of stifling their development. I mean, Mannar is a hugely, rapidly growing tourism hub because of its archaeology and because of the bird life. Hotels have been springing up. They've got these beautiful beaches. It's ideal for wind and surf sports. So Mannar is fast growing in that sense. Now, when you put up 52 towers in this landscape, you really cause it to be transformed entirely from being something like a wilderness landscape, which it is not because it's occupied by people, of course. It becomes much more lived in. It becomes a concrete jungle.
Right.
And so I think that will have an impact on tourism, and people from Mannar are conscious of that. I have had many people, since I went public on this 2 weeks ago, contact me from the local communities and saying, can you help us? Can you be our voice? Because they don't feel they have a voice, even though institutions have been consulted. The funny thing is, this whole EIA document, the Environmental Impact Assessment document, runs into 600 pages. And a lot of it deals with the impact on birds. But there's nothing in there from the Department of Wildlife Conservation. They don't seem to have been involved in the process at any point. Now, this is their territory because they manage all these protected areas. The 5 protected areas around Mannar, in and around Mannar, are managed by the Wildlife Department, but they've had no say in designing the terms of reference for the environmental impact assessment or even evaluating the assessment. Their letterhead doesn't appear in the file.
Right.
So this just shows the haste with which this thing has been rushed through, without even consulting the appropriate government authorities, let alone the public, let alone the local people in that community.
My final question, Mr. Pethiyagoda, what should concerned, conscientious citizens and policymakers do at this stage?
I wouldn't recommend protest, because that is, public protest is always disrupting, and we want to have an environment in Sri Lanka that is good for our economy and our international image and for tourism.
Sure.
What I would suggest that we do is that the people who we have elected to office to do this on our behalf do their job. So I would like to see Sajith Premadasa, Anura Kumara Disanayaka stepping up, making a committee, having an investigation into this, and demanding that we do this right, and not giving into this complete pillaging of the state coffers.
Mr. Rohan Pethiyagoda, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and your perspectives, and for daring to care. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.